Hey guys, it's Syama here from Scaling Retail for another episode of Retailing Weekly. Thanks for joining. This week we've got some really interesting things to talk about. I'm really excited. We have Davos coming up, cool stuff happening there with fashion and sustainability. And we've also got some really interesting things happening across the world of replicas and fake goods. And I kind of want to get started with that topic. You guys will see here a Gucci mug with the cast of Stranger Things on here. Now, the reason why I'm bringing this up is it is really funny as it pertains to this recent article that just came out on Vice on their garage site. So it's garage.vice.com. And it was talking about all of these really interesting fake collaborations that are happening out there. And we're talking about fake collaborations that don't even exist anywhere else, right? So these guys, you guys have probably been seeing things like, Supreme with Louis Vuitton. You've probably been seeing things from, Balenciaga just came out with their Mr. Porter collection. But now, right, we're starting to see collaborations come out that don't even exist at all. And why is that so fascinating? Well, when you think about collaborations that don't exist, well, it's basically the most exclusive thing, right? It's something that doesn't even matter because it's so fake. And so what's funny is I have my Gucci Stranger Things mug, which again is not a Gucci mug or Stranger Things authorized. However, it is such a one of a kind product because it has just been mashed up. And so what's really fascinating about this is you're finding out there, guys, websites that are taking the price points are between $90 and $180. You're looking at things that are taking upwards of 2 months to ship out. But what's so fascinating is that because this is not even a real product, you're not actually going to be able to return it anywhere, but it does have this like intrinsic higher value because it is so different, right? Sorry, plant, because it is so different. So something to really keep in mind, the bootleg business, I think has a net worth of I think they said about $460 billion, right? There's so much that's happening out there in the gray market economies. Back when I used to be a buyer at the outlets for Gucci, it was so interesting because one of the things that we were always looking at as outlets, we're certainly taking leftover merchandise, we are producing products specifically for the outlet stores. And what was so fascinating is we were constantly concerned about what was happening in this gray market economy because that, of course, takes out that kind of sale or outlet price business. So anyway, guys, something just to keep your eyes out, right? It's like that Balenciaga Mr. Porter collaboration was super cool, but Off-White just got knocked off with their recent collaborations. You're going to start to see some interesting one-offs. And what I think will be important here is how the resale market is able to really monitor that. So imagine something like a Real or even on eBay for that matter, right? There are so many different branded collaborations that it's going to have to become really important on the resale market that we start to see how people are authenticating these purchases, right? Because think of it from this perspective. If Louis Vuitton is producing an item and it's a collaboration with Supreme, but it's a Louis Vuitton item, then of course it's going to have the LV kind of marks, right? You're going to have the serial numbers, you're going to have ways of authenticating it. But what if it's like, Supreme with LV, right? It's a Supreme product. Well, how do you actually validate and authenticate that? It's not like Supreme has their own ways of doing authentications, right? So I think that's a really interesting thing for us to think about as retailers, as we start to deal with kind of this resale market. The next thing I thought was really cool is there's a new company that's recently launched about a year ago that's kind of similar to Rent the Runway. And what I think is really fascinating about them is that they are doing a rental market for jewelry. The company is called Flaunt, Flont. Racked recently did a bit of a write-up around them. And what was really interesting is they were basically talking about kind of the rental markets for jewelry and how instead of having to buy these higher price point items and even instead of tapping into the resale market, now we start to look at kind of the Uberification and Airbnbification of the jewelry market. And so what's interesting about that is if you lose the item, I think you pay about 25% of the product value. But what's going to be fascinating here is to really see kind of where and what kinds of brands are starting to participate in these items like Flaunt. So for a lot of them, jewelry brands out there, when you start to look at some of these startups, it can be really interesting to see if there are ways of getting co-branded, ways of doing exclusives, releasing special edition products specifically on these new type of branded platforms. And the reason why is they're spending so much money and they get funding to do these big marketing reaches and activations, which can mean really great things for your business and your brand if you've been able to strike up a relationship and a conversation with them. So I think something like that is really interesting as a brand out there, or even as a retailer, multi-line retailer. If you have off-price goods that you're looking to bank off, I think that you can definitely start to look at companies like Flaunt, for example. With jewelry, or obviously Rent the Runway when it comes to collections, clothing collections. But I think it's great to start to think about how you can start to leverage these spaces and start to leverage these markets to then be able to get rid of excess inventory. We are still living in this era of just increased drops on a monthly and seasonal basis, right? Every month there's new products. So as retailers, how we start to offset and resell those products become really important, especially if we think about doing it in ways that are a little bit more undercover, right? If you sell off a product or something like Flaunt ends up, taking and appropriating it, reselling it, and doing it in this rental market, is it really a dissolving, or is it really diluting rather the brand, right? Is it diluting your brand? Most of the time, I'd say no. I think it's kind of seeing ourselves as a new opportunity and a new way to enter the market and penetrate the market. Okay, so the next article I want to talk about is Glossy. Glossy had an article that recently came out called Direct-to-Consumer Brands Are Using Loyalty Programs to Dodge the Sales and Promotional Trap. And I think it's really smart. It's something that we've been covering and having our eyes on now for quite a few months. I'd say about 6 months. We've been really consulting a lot of our brands right around the holiday season on how to approach that. And I'm telling you, the most successful brands that we worked with ended up not doing big, massive sales. They ended up doing things that were really tailored specifically to their customer base. Meaning if they did put something on markdown, they only would promote it and mark it down for their newsletter group. And I think that that's an important thing to consider and to look out for. Using loyalty programs and finding ways of getting brands to become more evangelists of your business is a great way to then start to understand predictively what products they are liking more, what products they're purchasing, and how to start to create products more and more specifically for them with smaller amounts of inventory. So Glossy was talking about companies like Mack Weldon, Movement. They've launched loyalty programs, and what they're doing is they're giving you price cuts, they're giving you perks. They are also, basically just remarketing. So if you're thinking about this like, a regular digital advertising strategy, they're basically just retargeting and remarketing all their promotionals and sales items specifically just to their audiences. And so there are easy ways of doing that. Having a loyalty program, quote unquote, is something that I think has really fallen out of fashion, right? Especially when you think about kind of the traditional ways of looking at loyalty programming. So for that, we think about things like a rewards card or a credit card, or, some way in which you're actually getting someone to accrue points, right? I think when we reapproach loyalty programming now for, let's say, 2018 and beyond, I think we need to start to think about, loyalty programs in terms of, how someone is actually, purchasing on a more frequent basis. So I think of it a little bit more as like, a VIP program, right? So if you purchase more product, then all of a sudden now you're going to get free shipping. Now you're going to get first access. Now you're going to get, exclusive insights, right? Or you're going to get to meet the founders, or whatever the case is. So think of it more in terms of VIP programming, right? If someone hits a certain threshold or dollar amount, how can you start to reward, how can you start to reward that behavior? And what are the perks that you can offer, right? Everyone offers free shipping, but do they offer free customization, right? Everyone offers a discount, but can you offer first access to sale, right? Start to think about ways in which you can leverage VIP access and make that something that's more dedicated, right? Instead of calling it a loyalty program, talk about it in terms of first access program, right? This is your first look, right? This is our influencer, right? As a shopping influencer, right? Influencers are no longer just the people who on Instagram, right? Influencers are people who wear your product and share that product with other people. So I'd start to think about all of those different angles when it comes to approaching a new loyalty program and how we think about that go forward. Okay, so another interesting article that came out in the New York Times has to do with Davos, and has to do with fashion and sustainability at Davos. So those of you guys who don't know about Davos, it's really where it's in Switzerland, and it's basically where the World Economic Forum takes place. It's an interesting place because it's basically business leaders, people from around the world who are showing up, very high profile, very elite, who are talking about the shape of where the world is heading from an economic standpoint. So different industries show up, different speakers. And what we're starting to see now are that more fashion players are getting in the game. And the reason why they're getting in the game is really from a sustainability standpoint. So they're really taking a look at this from a really from an economic standpoint. When you think about sustainability, when you think about climate change, when you think about where the world is heading, a huge percentage of the detriment to the world is done by manufacturing and production, right? So when you start to think about how we can start to curb things like climate change, how we can start to be more proactive about what's happening in the world, a lot of that comes back down to the clothes that we wear. And it's funny sometimes people don't really make that connection between, the macro environment and where we live and, where things are made. And then really bringing that back down to the impact and influence that a lot of today's retailers and manufacturers have to really shift the conversation and therefore kind of shift the environment. So what I think is really interesting is that there are going to be a lot of different talks here. People are going to be talking about the rise of robots, what's happening in terms of economic employment. Again, a lot of those things are coming back to retail, right? To these kinds of markets and trade businesses. So when you think about things like Amazon and shipping, obviously having robots is going to be detrimental to a lot of jobs. But positive in a lot of other ways. This is certainly not a conversation about that, or we could probably go on for a long time. But the other things that we'll be thinking about are obviously the stores. Amazon opened up their store. There are no cashiers, right? This is the Amazon Go. This is the way of the future. So how do these things have economic implications on a small scale, but really on a global scale at Davos? And then also starting to take a look at who are the different key players here in the fashion industry that are going to be able to be change makers and start to look at environmental activism and how retail and how fashion can really play a part in that. So I think it's going to be really fascinating. Sinead Burke is going to be there. She's a big fashion environmentalist, sustainability activist. Stella McCartney, obviously one of the biggest pioneers in fashion and sustainability for many, many years now, really was one of the first to come out with a very high-end exclusive, fake leather handbag, which now we're starting to see a lot more brands starting to pick up on that bandwagon. I was just reading earlier today on Vogue about another fashion brand that is launching, that's wanting to do exclusively faux fur, right? But high-end faux fur. So we're starting, guys, to now see ethics and environmental sustainability issues start to really be appropriated by higher end luxury brands in a bigger way. And so I think that us kind of looking at Davos, looking to see how the conversation continues, will be really interesting and amazing. And for retailers and brands out there, it's about time we start to think about how can we make these changes that are not only great for the planet, but also great for our brands. Everything that we do that's amazing should really be publicized, right? Not for the sake of publicity, but certainly because those are press worthy activations, right? And so I think that that's something that's really, really important. And then the last article that I wanted to mention was recently published on Women's Wear Daily. This is the NPD Group. Now, the NPD Group is a huge market research firm. They are really one of the best in the industry. Huge retailers go to work with them, and they really want to see a lot of their statistics. They do a lot of demographic research, and they pour a lot of time into really producing constructive data. And so some of the key points that I think are really worth mentioning and kind of discussing here have to do with the shift in how consumers are shopping online and really what that is looking like and how that demographic is changing. So let's kind of unpack that as really our last point of conversation for today's Retailing Weekly. So the first point here really has to do with the change in the demographic of shoppers. It's really not just younger shoppers these days. We're seeing a much larger demographic shift towards older shoppers. Funny enough, we're also starting to see on Facebook advertising, this was not included in the article, but on Facebook advertising, we're also starting to see really older demographics that are starting to grasp a lot easier and starting to activate a lot more with age demographic specific advertising, right? So while we all think about pitching millennials, we all think about pitching Gen Zs, Gen Xs, there is an older demographic that is starting to really take on to technology, and they're starting to spend more time and more money online, especially now that we start to see baby boomers get older, right? But now we also have Gen Zs, right? Gen Xs getting older, and then we also have millennials getting older. So we're also aging into technology a little bit more now than, let's say, when we last took a look at how e-commerce users were responding, and it was really a much younger demo. The next point was having the rise in niche categories. And this is something that we've also had our eye on, we've been talking about now for quite some time. Brands that are specific with niche categories are really killing it. Companies like Greats are doing a fantastic job of really focusing on one product. Warby Parker also focusing on one product. Bonobo's one product. Mgemi one product, right? Just focus on lingerie, amazing. Just focus on outerwear, amazing. Canada Goose, the OG of having a niche one branded product. So what I think is amazing is to really keep your eyes out for how these niche retailers and these niche brands are starting to create and build outwards as well, right? They're starting with one product, and then they're also starting to break out into adjacency products. Now, this is distinctly different from the rise of another different phenomenon, which is obviously the lifestyle brand, right? Everyone had their eyes on it. Lifestyle brands started to become really big about 5-7 years ago, when it was the brand that had a little bit of everything, right? It's like you had one brand and you bought that brand and all the different products that it really created. But the original lifestyle brands were actually around for much longer, right? Let's harken back to things like Martha Stewart, for example, a great lifestyle brand, right? Certainly done through licensing, but she really created a name for herself through being able to provide products, services, content, media across multiple different platforms, right? So now we have these days these lifestyle brands, right? They have a little bit of everything, some home goods, some products, some apothecary. They also have some ready to wear. And then we have these very niche driven direct to consumer businesses. Both of them are still going to be able to be successful. However, I do believe that these niche brands, as similar to what MPD was talking about, are really having their heyday now, meaning they are really driving in on individualization. In fact, guys, by focusing on one product, it gives you so many more capabilities to do more with that product, right? So imagine having just a sneaker. Not only do you perfect the sneaker, but you also perfect the leathers. Now you can do personalization. Now you can offer a suite of services. Now you can take in the sneaker, clean it, return it back to your customer. You can create an entire service industry around personalization, customization for that one product. So I think that that is ultimately kind of where we need to be seeing these niche brands and categories go, is really back to where we want the business to capture that customer engagement and customer interaction. So the third thing that was interesting is NPD was also saying that people who never used to shop online are testing the waters and shopping a little bit more. And I think that that is really true. I think we're starting to see people increase their shopping. I think more importantly than increasing shopping, guys, is mobile shopping, right? With all of the great new integrations with shopping through your cell phone, I think what we're going to see is kind of a bypassing of people who were shopping on their desktops to now older demographics, baby boomers, etc., who are maybe suck at their computers, not all of them, but some who suck at their computers. We're going to start to see them actually go straight to mobile, right? Obviously, we're also seeing that with much younger demographics, right? They're going straight to mobile. So I think one thing to keep on the rise for is who is actually using the desktop, who is using the laptop, right? So certainly you have your millennials who are working, right? You have your Gen X, right? So they're certainly working. They're on mobile and desktop. But when you take a look at who is on their phone, right, it's much easier for a baby boomer, an older generation, to only use an iPhone, right, than necessarily having to use a computer. It's also much easier for the Gen Alphas, who are just now kids and they're getting older, to also start to get used to buying and seeing product and navigating directly through their phones. So I think that phone optimization is really where we're going to be able to capture both ends, right? The tablet, still in there, performance of tablets are not that high. I think that tablets kind of don't provide that same tactility. But I do think that, again, the biggest market opportunity here is in mobile. And then lastly, shoppers already know they can find the best deals online. Now, retailers need to outdo themselves when it comes to speed and delivery. And that was the final point that NPD was talking about. And I think that's a very valid point. And basically what it means is, hey, if you can't beat them in price, what can you beat people in, right? What can you beat your other retailers in? How do you beat your competition? And so when you think about where you can win, right, you need to make a list of that. Yes, you need to be winning in terms of delivery. Yes, you need to be winning in terms of speed to delivery. However, you also need to be winning in terms of packaging. You also need to be winning in terms of customer service. You also need to be winning in terms of exclusives that, let's say, your brand isn't selling to another wholesaler, right? You need to start to think about ways in which you can diversify your product inventory, the frequency of that product, and all the other bells and whistles. Because guys, this is not a new problem, right? Obviously, every young brand worries, and every medium-sized brand worries that once they sell to wholesale, all of a sudden they then have to think about how they're going to keep their business and how they're going to grow their business. But guys, it's not about cannibalizing it, right? Your brand value grows and increases depending on having the right selection of wholesale distribution partners. But it is very helpful because as soon as you get that kind of brand recognition and someone comes back to your website, comes back to your social, you then have a really great opportunity to be able to convert them and create brand loyalists. So don't be scared by accessibility. You certainly have control over distribution, but be more open to the ways in which you actually need to win the hearts and pocketbooks of your consumers. All right, guys, that's all for me. Have an amazing rest of your week. I'll be sipping here on my Gucci Stranger Things faux collab. And I hope you guys have a fantastic day. Bye.